Problem number 3. Definition by exception versus definition by categoricals. All these absurdities were avoided in the historic definition of a woman. That defined a person by reference to biological features and had no significant challenge through all human history up until now. There were a plethora of physical characteristics that one was able to use to define a woman. A woman has 2 X chromosomes in cells of her body. She has female sexual genitalia. She has demonstrable differences from males in brain and body anatomy, physiology, and neurochemistry. She has very different levels of hormones in her body that resulted in observable outward differences from males. After puberty, she would menstruate. She is capable of becoming pregnant and giving birth to a child. In the list of characteristics just given, there are a number of features that one might be tempted to leave out. The characteristic of giving birth and the characteristic of having female sexual genitalia are 2. The reason for this is that many in the transgender movement would attempt to use these as argumentative wedges to break apart a definition of male and female from reference to biological characteristics, and thus to arrive at the hallowed insistence that sex and gender are 2 completely disconnected things that must not be confused or linked together. If sex and gender are 2 different things, and if words for males and females refer to gender, whatever that is supposed to be, rather than biological sex, then persons in the transgender movement might feel that the movement can avoid the absurdities highlighted above. Consider the abnormal case of complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, or CASE. When born, persons with this disorder are phenotypically female in regard to genitals, and show no signs of genital masculinization, and yet they have a 46XY karyotype. They have XY chromosomes, but they have female genitalia. There are 3 possibilities to deal with this situation. The person is a male, a female, or a third thing. If one decides that the person is a male because of the XY chromosomes, then a male can have female genitalia, and so female genitalia is not a 100% guarantee that a person is female. If one decides that the person is female because of the female genitalia, then a female can have XY chromosomes, and so XY chromosomes are not a 100% guarantee that a person is male. If one decides that we have neither male nor female, but some third type of person because of the unusual biological characteristics, then one breaks free of the sexual dichotomy and can ask why we should not let other anomalies be used to add even more categories beyond the customary male and female binary. Whatever one of the 3 options one chooses, the transgender advocate will contend that certain genitalia or chromosomes cannot be an essential feature of a particular sex. The very notion of an essential characteristic or property P of some object O is that P is present in all instances of O. If there exists an object O that does not have the property P, then P is not an essential property of O, but rather what is called an accidental property. And the transgender advocate demands that a definition of a particular sex be one of necessary properties or characteristics of that sex. Hence, if a person affected by complete androgen insensitivity syndrome has XY chromosomes but female genitalia and is deemed to be a female, the transgender advocate will claim that since chromosomes do not determine biological sex, our definition of male and female should not make reference to chromosomes. Those who hold to a common sense view of sex that would include chromosomes in the definition of males and females often complain that the transgender advocate is letting the exception rather than the norm determine the rule, and that it is improper to do this. While this might be true, it does not clearly show why the transgender's elimination of accidental properties from a definition of something would be inappropriate. After all, it rightly is standard practice in philosophy to define the identity of something by its necessary properties and to not include its accidental properties. So why should we not also exclude accidental properties in the definitions of the sexes and only include essential properties? Saying that we should not let the exception determine the rule does not clearly answer this question. To see why the transgender's approach to defining human sexual categories by essential characteristics is flawed, we can consider a real-world case of something other than male or female sex as an illustration of the fact that, for living beings and other things in the physical world, the insistence on using only properties shared by all members of a kind for defining what constitutes being a member of that kind is contrary to reason and contrary to our normal correct practice. Instead of considering what it means to be male or female, Let us consider the question of what is a human being. Further, let us consider the case of someone born without a pinky finger, or, as in the case of the evangelist Nicholas James Vujicic, someone born with tetraamelia syndrome, which is a condition of being born without arms or legs. The same logic of the transgender movement about chromosomes and genitalia can be applied to the missing finger and the absence of arms and legs. Is the person born without a pinky finger a human being? If we say that he is, then applying the logic of the transgender movement would mean that we should not define a human being as having 10 fingers. It says that if someone is born with female genitalia but XY chromosomes, then either we must say that we can't use the presence of male genitalia in our definition of a man, if we deem the person with case a man, or that XX chromosomes can't be used to define a woman, if we deem the person with case a woman. Well, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. If just one person with a normal genitalia or chromosomes is enough to eliminate those features from the definition of the sex to which the person belongs, then the person born without a finger prevents us from defining human beings as having 10 fingers, and Nicholas Vujicic prevents us from defining human beings as having any legs and arms at all. More than that, just about anything in a human being that we can eliminate and the person would still survive would mean that we would not be able to use whatever was removed in the definition of a human being so long as a single human being was living without it. Some people have donated or lost a kidney. So the transgender's approach to the definition of the sexes would not let us define a human being as having 2 kidneys. If someone lost their eyes and vision, we would not be able to say that a human being has 2 eyes and can see. Some people can't hear, and so we can't define humans as being able to hear. Some people survive without a stomach, and so we can't define humans as having a stomach if we adopt the transgender's approach to defining the sexes. In fact, since even the ability to remove something from the body and have the human being still survive would mean that having whatever was removed was an accidental property and not an essential one, there does not even have to be a single human being in existence who lacks the characteristic in question for it to be inappropriate to use that characteristic in the definition of a human being. Were it possible for us to live as a brain in a vat, then we would not be able to include most of the human body in the definition of what it is to be human. What these examples show is that the transgender's method of only permitting characteristics that every member of a kind has in the definition of that kind leads to absurdity if applied elsewhere in the physical world beyond the male and female sexes. In the characterization of kinds of beings in the physical world, we do not in normal practice define things by eliminating from our definitions of kinds of beings any feature that a rare member of that kind might fail to possess. We instead employ the concept of deformity or defect. We recognize that the select members of a kind may fail to fully instantiate the definition of a member of that kind due to some abnormality or problem, but that the members are still members of that kind. They are simply deformed or defective members. Rather than employing only predicates that every member of the species has for our definitions, we instead use what are called categoricals, definitions that are not universal quantifiers, but are more than just existential quantifiers. Being more than existential quantifiers means that something more is meant than that at least one of the members of the kind has the characteristics in question. Not being universal quantifiers means that not every member of the kind must have every characteristic that forms the definition of that kind. This makes room for the concept of defect or deformity, and the ability of some members of the kind to only partially realize the definition of a kind while still being members of it. Categoricals establish the basis by which defect or deformity is determined, and the norm by which the extent of that defect or deformity is measured.
Thank you for listening. Credible Faith is a global missions-minded apologetics ministry with content available in 7 different languages across 7 websites: German, Russian, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and English. If you would like to support the global apologetics work of Credible Faith, go to crediblefaith.org and click on the donate icon. If you would like me to give an apologetics workshop or participate in a debate at your university, or if you would like me to give a Great Commission missions conference or apologetics conference at your church, get in touch with me through the Contact Us section of the Credible Faith website. You can also submit a request through the website to get Credible Faith's monthly email. If you are a native speaker of Russian, German, Italian, French, Spanish, or Portuguese, and if you notice that an essay from the English website is not available on the Credible Faith website for your language, feel free to get in touch with me about translating the essay, and I would read through your translated material for quality control and the desire to see content from the essay made available in your language. Thank you for listening, and have a great night.